You're listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. Each week, your host, Polly ReQua, interviews veterinarians and individuals in the pet industry from across the nation answering pet questions. Bark and Wag podcast is produced weekly for your enjoyment, and show notes can be found at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. That's BARKNWAG.com. Please remember to subscribe to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk.
Welcome to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk. I'm your host, Polly ReQua. Today we're talking to Stacy Pursell, CEO, Global Executive Recruiter for Animal Health and Nutrition, Animal Science, Pet Product Industry, and a veterinarian recruiter about finding a job in the pet industry. Welcome back. Thank you so much for coming back. Our listeners enjoyed the podcast, and we just wanted to dig in a little bit more about the positions that you place. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Polly. Thank you for having me back. I'm glad to be back on your podcast.
So tell us, what type of positions, I know you touched on it a little bit in the last podcast, but can you go a little bit deeper into the positions that you do place?
Absolutely. I would be glad to. The positions that we place vary from sales positions, roles in marketing, research and development, more technical roles. Some of them require veterinary degrees. We even place at the plant level. We've worked on searches for site managers, site directors. These are manufacturing plants that can manufacture anything from pet food to pharmaceuticals to biologics type products. Going into more depth on the sales roles, we fill positions that sell to veterinary clinics, positions that sell to mass market and retail or pet specialty. We'll place regional sales managers, sales directors, vice presidents of sales. On the marketing side, we'll place product managers, brand managers, marketing managers, directors of marketing, VPs of marketing. We'll place veterinarians that will do sales training or technical services. We'll place people in pharmacovigilance, and those roles typically are veterinarians, so they're handling calls of adverse reactions or complaints. We do roles in research and development, all kinds of positions that we fill there, product development, executive leadership positions, mid-level management, director, VP, the C-level. So your chief marketing officer, your chief veterinary officer.
So you're busy.
Yes, it really varies.
And when you're looking for a candidate, what are some of the characteristics you look for?
Well, looking at candidates, I look for things like positive attitude, can-do people that are not running from a negative situation, that are just, burnout, trying to get out of something that they don't like, but people that are truly trying to advance their career to the next level, people that are positive, can-do, people that are ready to contribute, that are, not necessarily miserable in their current situation and trying to run out the door, but someone that's just looking to better themselves and move on to a better opportunity with increasing responsibility.
And do you have to have an animal health background for you to place that person?
Most of the time, yes, depending on what the position is. And we have filled positions with people from outside of the industry. But if it's an animal health company that's hiring our firm, most of the time they are looking for somebody with animal health experience. If they're in the pet specialty area, usually they're looking for somebody with a pet specialty background. Usually when our clients come to our firm, they're looking to hire somebody away from a direct or indirect competitor. Occasionally we'll have positions where, we have a couple positions right now in sales where they don't necessarily need an animal health or a veterinary or pet background. They just need to have a sales background and be a pet lover. So for those two sales positions, we have one in Colorado and one in Texas. They don't require it, but most of the positions do require some type of industry experience.
And what type of trends do you see in the industry?
On the veterinary side, consolidation with the manufacturers, consolidation with the veterinary practices, more corporate-owned veterinary practices. Those are some of the trends that we're seeing in the animal health and veterinary industry right now.
So we just moved here in June from Chicago, and in Chicago, you could walk into a clinic and you could see any type of specialist. And here, we're being in Colorado, we're kind of removed from outside of Denver, but if you want to see a specialist, you need to drive to Denver. You might be driving to Boulder. You might be driving to a suburb. So I think that's kind of interesting how it's almost like a mini hospital when you bring in your dog, especially the emergency clinics in Chicago.
There is a shortage nationwide of veterinary specialists right now. There are more openings out there in the marketplace for specialists than there are specialists to fill those positions. So if you are a veterinary specialist right now, you're probably getting calls from a dozen practices trying to hire you. And when we work with one, they're getting offers from multiple practices. They're very much in demand.
And do you find more veterinarians going into private practice by themselves or going into clinics?
Well, right now, I would say that because of all the consolidation and more of the corporate-owned veterinary clinics, and there's new corporations popping up every day. I got a call yesterday from a new one, another call today from another new one. And so what they're doing, these corporations are buying up mom and pop veterinary clinics and rolling them up. And so we're seeing more of a trend from veterinarians going to work for these corporations versus opening their own practice.
And so do you find then are the fees set by the corporate or are they set by the veterinarians?
The fees for the veterinarian services?
Yeah, services.
They would be typically set by the corporation.
Based on the different communities that they're in?
Yes.
Interesting. And so pretty soon there'll be a per diem, kind of like walking into a doctor's office.
Well, and two, it depends on some of the corporations allow more of those decisions to be made at the local level. And then some of them, those decisions are based at the corporate level. So it really varies from one corporation to another. I would say that with the larger corporations, those decisions are going to be made more at the corporate level. And then with some of the smaller ones, they'll allow some of those decisions to be made at the local level, just depending on the local community and what typical fees are for services and things of that nature.
So do you have any job tips for our listeners? What I'll do is I will put your information on our show notes along with a link, but I just was wondering if you had any tips. I'll definitely have you back in the future, but I wanted to see if there was anything special that our listeners should know as they apply for different positions.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it's a very competitive market. However, right now, it is a candidate-driven marketplace. Candidates are in the driver's seat because there are so many openings. I would say that's especially the case for the more technical types of roles, for veterinarian and other types of technical roles, but it's still at the same time a very competitive marketplace, especially for positions like sales positions because of all of the consolidation. So anything that you can do to give yourself a leg up in the process, one thing is to be realistic, to set realistic expectations, to allow some time for your job search, to look for the right opportunity, be flexible. People that are willing to relocate, for example, they have more opportunities than people that are limiting themselves to just one specific geographic location. Be realistic as far as the compensation that you're expecting. Do some research, make sure that what you're looking for is competitive in the marketplace. Make sure that you have references ready and available. Those are some things that people could do.
How long is the typical job search in your field?
It depends on the level of the person. The higher the position, the longer that it takes. So for an executive, it could take 6 months to a year. For a position in sales, it can take 30 days, 45 days, 60 days. Depends on geographic area, depends on the amount of experience the person has and their salary history and salary expectations.
And so you handle all of the pre-qualifying, and then at the end, they talk to the company. Is that how it works?
We do. So when we're hired by an employer, we do the initial search. We're doing the search and the sourcing and the initial interviewing, and then we'll put together a short list of the most qualified candidates that we've uncovered during our search, and then we'll present that short list to our client, and then our client will determine from there who they're going to interview. And then they'll typically interview somewhere around 3 to 5 people, depending on the position, and then they'll go through their normal interview process, and then we'll be there every step of the way through the interview process to give guidance to both the hiring manager and the candidate so that they know what to expect every step of the way. And then when the hiring manager decides which candidate they're going to hire, then they will typically involve us to do salary negotiations, helping the person to resign from their current position and just ensure a smooth transition from their current role to the new company that's hiring them.
Well, I certainly appreciate you being on the podcast today, and I hope you'll come back with even more tips for our listeners.
I would be glad to, Polly. Thank you for having me on your podcast today. I appreciate being invited back, and I look forward to coming back again in the future.
Thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to having you back.
Thank you for listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, www.barkandwag.com, to your friends and other pet owners. Have a pressing question for a veterinarian? Ask your question at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. This has been a KFR production. Join us next time for another edition of Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk.